All right, I'll call the meeting of the Health Insurance Reform Commission to order. I want to call roll.
Delegate Ware. Here. Delegate Byron. Here. Delegate McNamara. Here. Delegate Sullivan. Here. Senator Saslaw. Here. Senator Surville. Senator Spruill. Here. Secretary Littell. Commissioner White. Senator Barker.
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Well, we have three proposals to be able to discuss today and see where we end up on all of these. And one of them, I guess, related would deal directly with the State Corporation Commission. It's a fairly short proposal on that. And then the other two are Delegate Byron and Senator Searle had drafted up things related to here. Senator Searle coming in now. So we will take up those three. And Tom, do you want to make any presentations on anything?
I can, or Delegate Byron.
Yeah.
I can start.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. The first bill, it's 2310379. This would direct the Bureau of Insurance to select a new EHB benchmark plan for the 2025 plan year that includes, in addition to what's already in there, coverage for prosthetic devices and components under the same terms and conditions of what's already in code for a large group, and two, formula and enteral nutrition products as medicine under the same terms and conditions as provided in the section that you all passed a few years ago. The bill contains an emergency clause. In order for this to be effective for the 2025 plan year, the Bureau would have to make application to CMS by May, so that's why there's an emergency clause on it. The two other bills are for future reviews of the essential benefits, health benefits benchmark plan. They set up a timeline for the review process. The timeline in each bill is pretty similar. The two major differences between the two is one, the final selection of the plan is done by this commission, and the first review would be this upcoming interim. The other bill, the final selection, the HERC's final product is a recommendation to the General Assembly of a benchmark plan, and the first review under that bill would be in 2025.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Delegate Byron.
After some brief discussion this morning while we were waiting on a quorum with the Bureau, there are some issues that I think before we get to the short bill, which we all talked about because of how to deal with two of the things that we mandated in the past session, there are some complications, if you might call it that might be better to work on the process first, because I think that will affect how we deal with the short bill that the staff presented first. So I don't know if Senator Searle wants to go first, or if you want to. I haven't had a chance to look at his bills, so I don't know the differences between the two of ours. How would you like to present? I'll ask you.
Well, why don't you go ahead and present yours, and then we'll have Senator Searle present it, and then we'll be able to figure out how to work in the other bill that has the two items on the prosthetics and the nutrition products.
Okay, and I may have to phone a friend, but I'm going to give you some of the things, the concepts that I was looking for when I asked for this to be drafted, and some of the discussions that we had in our committee at the last meeting. So we had talked about the possibility of not having to go through this process every year, that would be cumbersome. So this is an every 5-year process, and my process was to take it through the same process that we use now for mandates, where someone would put a bill in, and that it would then go to the HERC Commission for review and analysis, and also an understanding of what those costs would be. And then HERC would make, once all of that has been completed, we would make a recommendation on those different mandates that may or may not be before us. And then the General Assembly, after the Bureau and public hearings and everything, would present a bill that would have the change for the benchmark plan that would be for the 5-year program. But the power would lie within the General Assembly. We talked about this, where the General Assembly would have that authority, and then that way the House and Senate both get to have input into it, and then the governor, of course, would be able to amend it. So that's the direction that I was going with, how the bill would be laid out. We may need to certainly look at some changes, because there has been some issues that have come up just very recently with CMS regarding how we're dealing with the mandates. And I think we probably need the Bureau to come up, or followed by Doug, because we were just discussing this. And I think we might have a solution to that issue and still keep the authority where I have it laid out. But maybe in a different way, where the mandates would have to go to HERC and be only those that HERC recommends for going forward would be in the bill that comes forward. And they don't want us to, CMS does not want us to specifically mention the mandates. So the thought was maybe bring those bills forward and then have an omnibus bill from each of the committees that would refer to, that they would all be rolled into and refer to the recommendations that have come forward. It sounds crazy, but when you deal with the federal government, that's what you're going to deal with, a little bit of craziness to get there. So the Bureau may be able, I'm trying to give you the easy version. They can come up and share with us what they've heard from CMS.
Yes, Julie,
if
come on
that's
up.
okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I might explain my version too before we take from them. I think that might make sense.
Sure, we could go ahead and do that.
Yeah. So Tom, is mine 241?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, I had no idea what to do here, so I called the National Health Law Program, I think is what they're called, and they had I think somebody at DLS, or no, somebody at NCSL provided me with a book, thing they put out on best practices for adopting these benchmark plans, and then I used that 20, 30-page report on best practices to develop the bill that I have here. And I think Delegate Byron's bill has some pieces of mine in it too, I think. But basically the idea is to sort of maximize the opportunities for public input and involvement in a process before we arrive at a new benchmark plan every 5 years. Mm-hmm. So all that's covered in the 5-year piece on the first couple pages. If you go to page 4, basically it's the process starts with the Bureau of Insurance. And by the way, I asked the Bureau of Insurance if they wanted to make the final decision, and then they basically said absolutely not. So, and I think in talking with the health insurance companies, they also pointed out that if we're going to be changing the mandated, the minimum benefit, that requires a legislative decision, because we have to mandate it for all policies, not just this policy, but all private policies as well. So that's why, in part, why they can't do it. But in any event, this bill, if you look on page 4, it starts with the Bureau. And in a review year, which is, again, every 5 years, they have to convene a group of stakeholders to get together to see if they want to make any recommendations to us as to any additional benefits that we should add. And then that has to happen by March 31. And then in June 30, by June 30, we have to have a meeting, and we have to decide if we want to make an application to change our benchmark plan, and we have to make some findings, a series of findings and stuff, and sort of agree to move forward on that. And then, if we agree that we want to do that, then the Bureau has to get one of these independent consultants to come in and do this actuarial analysis, which then has to be reported back to us by September 30. Then by December 31, after getting back the actuarial analysis, we have to decide what to include. And then, under federal law, I believe we have to have a public hearing on that to allow the public to comment on any changes to our benchmark plan before we can take any further action. And then after that public hearing, a final decision can be made. And I believe the way I had it written, the final decision was to be made by the HERC. And I understand since then that there's been some concerns raised that that might be unconstitutional or on questionable constitutional grounds. It's not really clear, I think. It might be okay, it might not be okay. But what we know is okay is that the legislature makes the decision like Chairman Delegate Byron's proposed. So I kept it out of the legislature because I thought that could just add more headaches to it. But if we sent it to the legislature with, like a straight up or down vote or something, that might solve the problem. I would just hate to think that we'd go through all this process and then the legislature would start messing around with it further. But in any event, that's essentially what my version does. And again, this wasn't any of my ideas. This is stuff I stole from the National Health Law Program in terms of what they best practices that they recommended to maximize public transparency and sort of stakeholder input and all this. So that's what mine does.
All right. Any questions of members of the panel? Yes.
If I could ask counsel a question?
Sure.
Mr. Stevens, am I right that the big difference between the two bills is it line 106 and 199? Well, they're both about the same. And I think they're nearly identical with the exception of in Delegate Byron's on line 108, there's a bill that's drafted, goes to the General Assembly, and in Senator Serval's on line 107, the commission makes a decision. Is that the real difference between these two bills?
Yes, sir, that is the biggest difference. The other difference being that Senator Serval's proposal would have the review in the upcoming interim, the first review, and Delegate Byron would have it in 2025. There's some other smaller differences, but yes, sir, you've identified it.
Who decides? That's where we.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Delegate Byron.
Yes, just speaking to a couple of the things that I said was, and it's not in the bill because we just talked about this. The other change that I would recommend is that, so if anyone wants to make a mandate like they do now, it comes before our commerce committees and we have sent it to HERC for review. That process would stay the same. And then if someone wants to, once that has been reviewed and recommended or not recommended, they would have to bring their bill back like they do now and state whether or not that bill has been recommended or not to get it passed again. And then once that is passed, those ones that have passed a second time would go into a bill for the EHB. So they can get into it more, but I would have to add that to this process based on some of the changes that have come down that they're requiring us to do. So we can go through that further, but that was an extra step that is not in the bill.
Right. All right. Anybody else have any questions right now? All right, Julie, you want to? Hold on a second. We got one more.
Okay.
Delegate Ware.
Just following up on Delegate Sullivan's question, I see the lines that he's speaking of, and I'm trying to figure, I'm not sure I see the distinction between the two, the decision-making distinction. If somebody could clarify for this.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Ware, if you look at draft 2586,
Okay.
on lines 108 through 109, the commission, 107 through 109, excuse me, the commission shall make a recommendation to the General Assembly in the form of the bill regarding such changes meaning changes to the EHB benchmark plan, if any, at the next regular session of the General Assembly. Whereas Senator Serval's version is on also 107 to 109. The commission shall determine which, if any, potential benefit changes shall be included and shall select a new benchmark plan.
Okay. I'm not with you. Gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Now, try again. So, thank you.
I'm Julie Blauvelt with the Bureau of Insurance. And we, related to these bills, we did have a call with CMS yesterday just to talk a little bit more about the process. I guess the things that I can bring up to you are that I think you all know that CMS doesn't require that the process or the entity who selects the benchmark plan be set out in statute, but I think that's just something that Virginia was interested in having, made clear after our study that we did. When in talking with CMS, they did say that the benchmark plan choice process and the whole application process that has to occur is very labor intensive, and it gets down into a lot of details. And what's going on with states before is that there's been a whole lot of back and forth with CMS and the state, or whoever the agency that is that's working on changing the benchmark plan. There's a lot of details that get changed, from what is set out in the benchmark initially through the end. So they, I guess, expressed a little concern about a process that would set out exact benefits in the legislature because of the inability to, make little changes in a timely manner. The process could happen, but it may just take 2 years, 2 General Assembly sessions versus one, where something's set out and then maybe some little changes are made and it comes back again to the General Assembly the next time. The process is an application process, so if we're directed to set out a benchmark plan with exact benefits and CMS doesn't approve something, then there needs to be something that would allow that to not then be EHB if it didn't get approved by CMS. And CMS also expressed some concern about legislation that sets out these specific benefits in the legislation because, as we all know from dealing with last session, there are issues when the legislation mandates a benefit because that's kind of what kicks it out of being an essential health benefit and makes it something that's in addition to essential health benefits under the federal requirements. They set out anything that is a state action after 2011, any benefit mandated by state action after 2011 is not essential health benefits and is in addition to EHB unless you change the benchmark plan. So you kind of get into a circular thing of if you mandate benefits specifically, does that kick it out of EHB? I think if there's a vague, if we still want to set out a process for mandating the benefits, I think if there's a vague, I guess, reference to how it's decided, who decides it, or based on recommendations from a certain committee, then that would meet CMS's requirements. And we can certainly work with CMS on whatever language the committee recommends and see what meets their specifications. I think that's about it. With just being cognizant of the next steps. If we do want to make a change for the 2025 benchmark plan, then We are moving forward. We're getting responses from the carriers about the two benefits that the Health Insurance Reform Commission wanted us to look at. Those responses are due back in a week for some plans, and our actuaries will get that analysis done by the end of January. If the process goes along like we've kind of set out, there would still need to be a decision after we come back with the actual cost information from the actuaries. Do we go forward with creating an application for the Essential Health Benefit Benchmark Plan to change that plan for 2025, which we still could? But there are some steps that need to happen and some decisions that still need to be made if we want that to happen for 2025.
All right, any questions? Any comments from either Senator Sorrell or Delegate Byron on these issues?
I was just going to ask Doug to come up and share a few comments, too, of different things that we discussed regarding what could take place with large groups, small groups, and how we go about recommending, which I think is a critical piece to this bill.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
so I'm hoping Doug doesn't confuse us. We know what problems on both sides. So are you going to fix it how we can fix it? Or are you going to further confuse me?
I'm hopefully going to be clear and concise.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning. I'm Doug Gray, Executive Director of the Virginia Association of Health Plans. I'm going to talk about who, what, and when. So the two bills, the who is the commission approves or the commission recommends a bill and the legislature approves. I prefer the legislature because that's traditionally what we've done. It also, frankly, if you choose as the commission to decide, you're going to put an enormous amount of pressure on yourselves. The reason we have a commission in the first place is to have a place to send the 20 or so mandates we get every year, to have a conversation and have a real analysis. JLARC and the Bureau do a real analysis, they report back, then you make a recommendation to the General Assembly. If it's going to take effect, the General Assembly decides. That's how we've done it up to this point, and that's how we continue to do it. The what, so I'm moving from, I'm done with the who. I think the legislature should do it because I think you'll have a tough time with the other approach. The what is whether the bill has gone through that process of analysis and recommendation and approval by the legislature as a mandate. So the question, and Tom can answer this question for you, not to put you on the spot, Tom, but my question is, if during the Essential Health Benefits Review, someone comes along with a benefit that has never been analyzed by JLARC and the Bureau, can it be included in the Essential Health Benefit proposal if the HERC decides it should?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Stevens.
yes, but it would go through the actuarial analysis.
Okay, so what does that mean?
Mr. Chairman, so
Yes.
if I can,
Delegate Sullivan.
so, Mr. Gray, phrasing that another way, what the rhetorical question you're asking, or the situation you're positing could happen is delegates and senators will stop introducing bills in the General Assembly in the first instance to get something declared essential health benefit. They'll just come straight here and skip that first step.
Mr. Chairman
Yes.
and Delegate, I think what I'm trying to suggest is that whether they have succeeded or failed previously, when an EHB process starts, they will all come and all try to bypass the passage of the mandate by an analysis by the HERC and just try to slip it in if they can. Will you allow them to? Probably not, because I think as a commission you'll say, look, we have a statute and a process and this hasn't been analyzed. I'm assuming you'll say that, but I can't assume that the people who are here, nor I or anyone else will be involved. What we have is what we have. So it doesn't say that it has to have gone through that process, which means it doesn't. And so that opens you all up to every 5 years, a process that could bypass the whole reason you have the entity in the first place. That creates a lot of pressure on you. And the question is whether you want to do that. That's up to you to decide. I think that's unlikely to happen. I think you would likely say that it has not gone through the process, has not been analyzed by the Bureau and Jerry Lark, and,
Mr. Chairman.
and should not be included.
Yes, Delegate
Just to be
Byron.
clear, I want to make sure I understand that. So they have bypassed before by having it get approved by Appropriations or Finance and saying that the state was willing to pick up the money. In this case, they would have to it would have to be put into the EHB, correct? And if that was the case, if you had where they had to have a positive recommendation to go forward, I understand what you're saying now. You're saying that they would still come at the last minute and bypass that. If we did not make it mandatory that we were the last stop. Yeah.
Well, look,
Never mind, I got it.
I'm not suggesting that we're intentionally creating this as a challenge. All I'm suggesting is we have a process that requires a bill to be introduced, an analysis to be done by the Bureau and JLARC, a recommendation to be made by the Commission, and a bill to be passed. That's what we have today. Under this approach for the EHB, you would have to recommend it. I would assume you would not do so unless an analysis had been done, which is already what's been required by the Bureau and the Joint Commission. But it doesn't say that you have to. That's the only comment I'm making. So I'm not, this is the kind of thing that you can fix during drafting. I'm just trying to make you aware that could potentially be a challenge as you go forward, and you might want to think about that.
Mr. Chairman.
That's it.
Yes, Senator Spruill.
So you recommend that we say that you have to keep a problem to have, because what you're saying that you don't have to, but the way it is right now, to keep it the way that we have it right now, you're saying recommend that we say you have to go through the process. Is that what you're saying?
Mr. Chairman and Senator, I would suggest that that's really the spirit of the law today, and I think most people on the Commission would follow that anyway. But to clarify that, that it has to have gone through the process, I think would be appropriate. But that's the observation and suggestion that I just wanted you to think about. That's pretty much it for the who and the what.
Mr. Chairman, Surville.
Yes, Senator Surville.
So your concern, just so I'm clear, is that if we'll go through all this stuff and then we'll put it in front of the legislature and people will start wanting to add things to it on the floor or in committee or something like that and without any kind of analysis, right?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, further question.
Yes, Senator Surville.
So, and that was one of the reasons why I said keep it out of the legislature, do it here in a controlled environment or whatever, but then people said mine might be unconstitutional, but in any event. So doesn't federal, I didn't read the federal regs, but my understanding from the National Health Law Program book was that the feds require you to have some kind of a public hearing process when you make a proposal. So
Absolutely.
It would seem to me that proposing a bunch of new stuff and never having a public hearing about it with an opportunity for notice and comment required under the federal regs would violate the federal process and get us in trouble. And I would think that type of problem would be enough counter pressure to prevent people from going crazy on the floor, although what's happening in Congress today doesn't give me a lot of hope, but we tend to behave better down here. So, I mean, wouldn't the federal requirements sort of put pressure on us against misbehaving like that?
Mr. Chairman, in the whether advocates would show up or not category, I have a lot of experience. And the answer is they will. And in large numbers with many, many issues. The truth is that we can't afford to add every benefit, even though we might like to. I've had to testify about against many benefits that I think were pretty darn good. But the practical reality is we can't afford to do all of them. And that is borne out by the actuarial requirement, as you suggest. I don't want the Commission nor the legislature to unintentionally create an incentive to have a difficult time with their process. The practical reality of a new EHB is it's a marginal change because of the process and the limitations of what can and cannot be done. And as a result, raising someone's hope that it could be something that it can't be is probably not an appropriate thing to do. It could cause some administrative challenges. I just felt like I had to share this with you because I've been doing this for 20 years. I worked with the Advisory Commission on mandated benefits, which was not a legislative commission like this is. And it was quite unwieldy. This, at least, is a group of the people who are on the committee of record, 4 of you from each body. Right. You are the responsible parties. That's what makes this a manageable process.
Yes, Delegate Ware.
So, Doug, if I heard you correctly, what you infer by your question is we ought to make explicit in the legislation the actuarial review process as being necessary to this.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate, it's not just the actuarial process. That's already in this proposal. It's that that the proposal has been reviewed by the Bureau and the Joint Commission and been recommended by the Health Insurance Reform Commission. We could make the next step and say, and has passed the legislature. I haven't gone that far, but we could do that too. I mean, that's in fact what the current process is today. I mean, just in the hypothetical world, let's say we passed a mandate as a recommendation from the HERC, but it failed to pass the legislature. That could be something that could be inserted into the essential health benefit, and it will have already gone through the process, and you would have to express your wisdom about whether to include it or not. That would not be prohibited. It had already gone through the process, right? So that's the difference between requiring it to have passed the legislature previously and to have been recommended by HERC previously. I didn't go that next step, but you know, if I was writing it, I probably would, but I'm not. And so I'm just trying to make a reasonable suggestion for you to think about. Look, we all have to live with whatever it is you set up as a process. And so I just want you to think about it. That's it. I mean, this is not an opposition in any way, shape, or form. I think putting a process together, deciding who decides is frankly something we should have done previously. And I think we all knew the answer was going to be the legislature in some form, I think, historically. And so we've lived with this one for, is it 8 years now? Yeah. How long? And the first decision got made by default by the administration, because the timing wasn't good and frankly just had to be made. That was the practical reality. One last thing of the when. So we did the who, the what, and the when. If you go forward with Delegate Byron's smaller bill, in theory, you would wait 5 years before you started this process again. If you chose not to go forward with Delegate Byron's bill and passed a process bill, then you could start after session this year, and it would go into effect in 2026, not 2025. So with her shorter bill, you have really 2 choices. One is you can kind of continue forward with the process, and one thing that's at stake is that the Bureau has a grant to pay for the process right now. They may or may not be able to extend that for next year. So those are just timing issues to think about. If you go forward with Delegate Byron's bill, shorter bill, then the question is, I don't think they'll let you do another one the following year. In other words, you can't do 2025 and then do another one for 2026. So having a 5-year interval is a good thought. So just keep that in mind as you consider the other approach. Thank you.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Picking up on some of the discussion here and on the issue raised by, discussed by Delegate Ware, would it be practical to be able to put into the whatever bill comes out finally a provision that there would have to be an actuarial assessment of each item that's added to the essential health benefits plan before that could be submitted to CMS?
Mr. Chairman, that is in the two proposals. That's also a federal requirement. So I don't know how a mandate would be in the HB without going through that process.
Right. All right. Yes, Delegate McNamara, so.
So I think it all boils down to whether we think we're going to end up with better decisions coming out of this body, which may understand the issue more just because of the concentrated nature, or do we open it up to the entire General Assembly? And I think that's really where the conversations boils down to. And I think the risk you run. The risk you run not opening it up to the General Assembly is the composition of this board. And as this composition of this board changes, the will of this board may not be the same as the will of the General Assembly. So that's the real decision point that, as I see it, we need to come to.
Delegate Byron.
Yes, just following up on that too with, historically our other commissions, JLARC, just thinking of all of them, they generally are commissions that review things. In our particular case, we do have mandates in our process of review for HERC, but those are generally advisory commissions that come back with a recommendation to the General Assembly. So that's another reason why I felt like there's 140 people that I think a good majority of them are not going to be inclined to think that that we are the ones that should make that decision for them. So, I mean, that's the reason for going the other way. And that gives it a very good opportunity to go through our bodies in the executive branch, which would give it additional time to get some things going. The question I think that still lingers is whether or not we had talked about this with the changes that CMS wants with not being specific, and if it needs to be even laid out in the code, if there's or an omnibus bill or a bill that directs the Bureau of Insurance, if that can be laid out in a legislative manner that directs the Bureau of Insurance by what's passed to what to put in, that's going to be acceptable to CMS, because a bill that comes forward that says we want to pass prosthetics, we want to do this, we want to do that, we want to do dental, is not, they don't want specific mandates in this. So we have to come out with something that that has that in the background that's referenced, but not necessarily in the front. Is that what you were saying with the Bureau, what you've heard? Yes. So does that need to be laid out in the bill, Tom? I would think you do, don't you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah,
Senator
I don't know who my question's for. But Delegate Byron, I agree with you. That's the hardest part of this whole thing for me. Mm-hmm. How do we pass a bill through 140 legislators on whether hearing aids should be included without saying in the bill we want to require hearing aids in the essential health benefit plan? Would it pass muster with CMS to say we're going to pass a bill that ratifies what this commission did? Would that satisfy CMS?
Yes.
We can certainly take that to them. That seems to, I think we were discussing that idea too, and I think that may work.
So the bill that ultimately would be in the General Assembly would simply say something like, we ratify what HERC did, and then during debate, or preferably even not during debate, before we get to the floor, we tell people, here's what you're ratifying. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
I think there still has to be a public comment, a draft application presented for public comment, and then after the public comment period, collection of that comment, analyzing that comment, and then presenting the final application. So it's just does the General Assembly, do they act on determining the initial application and the final application? I guess that's just a decision to be made.
Yes. Mr. Gray?
I think there may be language we could use to allow CMS the flexibility to have some modifications done. The challenge with the mandate is the mandate says you will do X, exactly X, and they look at it and say, well, that doesn't really meet our criteria. We want it to be slightly to Y. Maybe we can give some language that gives a little bit of authority to CMS to work out the details with the Bureau. So I know legislation is usually exactly this, and I think the challenge is that they want to have a little bit of flexibility. That's why they're worried about it. And it is true that in this process, the governor will still have their say.
Right.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Byron?
So I don't know if we can agree in concept, because I really don't think until we get CMS guidance that we will have a solution that we can all agree upon. I think it's good that everyone on this body knows what the, what the problems are that exist, or challenges, I should say, that we will need to address. Maybe even since once we talk about this other little bill that will have its own set of problems, if it's not going to be for a while, perhaps we can still pass something or work on a concept, which we have done, that goes into even a conference if it comes to that, and something that doesn't require, that sets up a process but doesn't have to have an effect next year. There may be different ways we can go about it.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
members of the commission, in the end, CMS has to approve an essential health benefit. They have the ultimate authority. So we're making a recommendation to them, and they can make modifications to it to get it over the finish line as far as they're concerned. And if they cannot make those, they will reject it, and we will have to go back and make those changes. So I don't think it's impossible to reflect that ability in the proposal. It's just figuring out the language, and that it's always fun to throw council under the bus. But I mean, they do have the ultimate authority. I mean, that's true. So
Right.
The legislature is really saying this is what to go forward with, and I mean, the truth is, it can't take effect unless CMS approves it. So you can put that in the bill, unless CMS approves it. So you can give them the authority to make those, or acknowledge, actually, their
Right.
ultimate authority.
Mr. Chairman, I think it
Yes,
would be
Delegate Byron.
probably good timing to intermix, because it all goes hand in hand, the other draft request that was supposed to address an EHB and how it's affected if we don't even have a approval for an EHB, or if we do, maybe can address this. We all discussed the fact that we had already passed prosthetics,
Right.
and we passed the other, and that we needed
Nutrition.
to include that in the next plan. So can you address if that can be done this year, or if we need to do it this year, what we need to do with this draft?
All right, so the Bureau of Insurance can move forward, and we are moving forward with the study of those two benefits in order to do an application. I think we might get stuck, though, without something laid out for us and directing us who makes the decisions to, after we present the analysis that the actuaries give us on the actual costs. There's a decision point of, do we move forward with those two benefits or something different for the application for a new benchmark plan in 2025? And then there's another decision point after the comment period, gathering those comments, what will be the final application to CMS for the benchmark. And so without, it just all depends on, if the commission feels like it has the authority to continue directing us to do that and changing the benchmark plan at this point without the legislation this year. If some kind of emergency legislation was passed, that would be, I think, enough time for the final decision. But there is a decision point, probably mid-February, coming up in a month, to decide on, do we move forward with a draft application?
All right. So one of the alternatives, options we have here, it seems to me, is to pick up on what two of you were just discussing, and that was that we go forward with this shorter bill right now. And
But in order for the shorter bill to go forward, it sounds like that CMS is telling the Bureau they want the other bill, something in place that actually outlines the process.
right.
And in order to do, so we have to kind of do a version
right,
of the
yeah.
longer bill,
Right.
maybe broader, maybe whatever, but, if we all agree on the concepts of if we agree on whichever version, the General Assembly's authority and the 5 years, and then this language may be tweaked based on what CMS tells them to address this. That's what we're saying. I think we understand what we're all doing, but we're waiting on acceptable language, and then not even sure about the process until they come back and say we approved the process, right?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
One,
Delegate Sullivan.
thank you. One question. I thought I heard Mr. Gray warn of a problem, though, of having to do with 25 versus 26. Did I hear that right, Mr. Gray?
No.
That if we do this in 25, we won't be able to do it again in 26, something like that?
Yeah, I'm not sure that CMS would let you do a new essential health benefit each year. So I think you would have to modify the proposal, either one, that sets out the process for an EHB to choose the year in which you start it, or that you're trying to finish it, either one. But a review year is once every 5 years. So if you go forward with this one, you're doing a new EHB for 2025 for those two items, then you need to choose when the next time, and we can ask.
There's no restriction on.
You
how
can do
long.
one every year? So, I mean, in theory, you could pass it to start for 26. And so, but I think your bill says 25, right? Both of the bills on the process for a 5-year process.
The process bill that came from Delegate Byron would begin in 2025. I think it would be for plan year 2028, because it's
Okay.
a
All right.
three-year if
So-
you need a bill. And
so
the other
I'm
one's
wrong.
2023 for 2026.
I have that on tape
Yeah,
here.
exactly. I think what we figured out is I'm wrong on that. So you can go forward with Delegate Byron's bill, and we'd have a new EHB for 2025 for just those two issues. And then in 2025, we would begin its first review year if the bill passed, correct? And that would be for an EHB in 2028. And so that actually makes sense.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Gray.
All right. Was there a consensus that we move forward on the shorter bill, the 30790, and deal with the two issues that we've already addressed, which was the prosthetics and the formula and enteral nutrition products, and to have those be what we will go forward with this year in terms of getting it all the way to CMS. And then we work and basically I think we've actually come across some of the uncovered some of the issues that we got to deal with on the process thing long term. We could do it with putting in one or two bills and then working it through the process, the legislative process here, and hopefully we'll have 46 days to do it rather than 30, and
And I would suggest if Senator Searle's going to put a bill in, that we don't make them, if we agree,
Right.
if we can come to an agreement in
Yes.
the process, we don't make them too different, or you're going to confuse everybody that doesn't have the same, background knowledge of this, that this commission has, and we've got to try to lead them and help them understand what this is all about, rather than put the whole thing right back out there again. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And I think, good, all right. And I think the two of you working together can, strategizing on things and working with.
But if the bills
with
are just a
Mr.
little bit
Stevens.
different, then we
Yeah,
can
so we can
confer
try to
them
minimize
or
eliminate
whatever we need to do
differences.
with them.
Yeah.
Is there anyone on the committee that wants to do anything different than the 5-year General Assembly approval concept?
Do you
Okay.
need a motion, Mr. Chairman?
We could have a motion, yes.
I move that we do what you just suggested.
Which was, no. All right, is there a second? All right, and is there any further discussion or questions? All right, do we need to call the roll, or can we just do a voice vote on
Voice
this?
vote, I think is
Voice
fine.
voice vote on this, okay, voice vote on this. All right, that motion is before us now. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. All right, we have accomplished something here. So
Great.
we hope, anyway.
So we got a little.
Let's
bill.
start, yes, yes. All right, anything else anyone wants to bring up today, so. All right, well, thank you very much, and I'll count on Delegate Byron and Senator Sorrell to sort of keep us apprised of how we're doing on things, so. Thank you very much.